morning, dear friends. Thanks to all of you who are watching our podcasts and the feedback you're giving us. I'm back in my garden here so you can hear the planes going overhead. There's some reno work going on at the Y next door. But hey, this is life, and we're so delighted and privileged to have you back in our story. I thought it would be good this morning to just talk a little around the conversation of choosing our leaders. I said on a previous podcast, it's one of the big three reasons why church plants fail. And I think it's because we don't give due consideration, firstly, to what the scripture requires. Secondly, what is culturally essential. Thirdly, what is a prophetic must for this church to step into the fullest measure of what God has over the next decade or two. And so I want to just talk a little bit this morning around the qualifications. The scriptures are our instinct and our first response. We always go back to the scriptures. And no passage of scripture is as elegant and beautifully written on the qualifications of biblical leadership as 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1. They're beautifully written, they're beautifully crafted, and what we see is Paul leans into four primary areas of qualification. The first is the leader himself or herself. The second is what their marriage is like, and then out of their marriage into their family. Thirdly, how they respond to the church and how the church responds to them. And then fourthly, the reputation they carry with outsiders. Now, there are a number of things that peel out of that conversation instantly. The first is this a comprehensive list? I don't think so. I think it's a fabulous list. It's not a checklist. It is a list that Paul devises to craft churches in that first generation context. They were beautifully written and essential to the first world, the first generation, and the first wave of churches that were being planted. But for example, Paul doesn't talk about love. Paul doesn't talk about humility. Paul doesn't talk about being strong and courageous. Other great examples of the text and some of the essential qualification pieces that we do need. Well, you may ask, why then isn't the list more comprehensive? Well, I don't think it's meant to be a checklist where we assess potential leaders by their ability to be hospitable, for example, and grade them out of 5. I think these are more heart reflections of the kind of leaders that we are wanting to lead this community going forward. Remember, leaders are culture creators. And I think Paul was identifying the things that he felt were imperative to create an alternative kingdom culture for the church and for the cities that they were ministering into. When we look, for example, at the Titus piece, we know that Titus, he had a phenomenally difficult task of coming into a situation that was so clearly ungodly, unbiblical, unhelpful, so combative, so deceitful, so aggressive. And I think what Paul does is he gives Titus an example of the alternative. This is the kind of leader that you need to look for, Titus, that will be different, have a kingdom difference, and you can build a church that reflects this new narrative around the kingdom story. So to you, church planter, my appeal is go and have a look at what the personal biblical essentials are. What does that look like for every individual person we are looking to bring onto our leadership team? Do they reflect those pieces? In the second session, I'll talk a little more around the hiring, firing culture that so decimates the American church, because it's never meant to be that. If we're a family, we don't hire and fire our family members. Paul is describing something far more exquisite around each individual being a family member and being raised up to reflect the family cultures. Secondly, their marriage. Now, this is slightly controversial, but this is the conviction Merrill and I had when we planted way back in the early 90s, that the husband and wife are called by God to be on mission together. And that doesn't mean they have to have the same job or the same employment, but it's a heart conviction that we're going to do this together. Like a mother, father raises a family together. So we find marriage is the primary example of what the church will become. So I do look over a potential leader's shoulders, and I do look at what their family's like, because it'll give me an indicator of how they will lead the bride of Jesus, how they will love the family and take care of her, and what their priorities will be, for sure. And then, of course, is just the being of good reputation with outsiders. I remember wanting to bring a man on to eldership in the church in South Africa, and he went in to resign the company he worked in, and his boss pleaded with him, please don't resign. He said, no, I have to. I have such a call on my life. Eventually, the boss in exasperation said, just come one day a week. And that's what we're looking for, that sense of being of good reputation with outsiders. Outsiders speak well of that person. They're not nutters. They're not crazy. They're not disconnected with reality. They have their feet firmly planted in day-to-day realities, but people love them. People find their humility compelling, their kindness they find enthralling. And those are the people that we want to bring onto our team. So I hope that's helpful. We'll talk more in the next session, but go back to the text, and I think the revelation of what Paul had hidden into the story will make it compelling. God bless you. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll chat soon. Bye-bye.